No one noticed him when he walked in. Not because he looked strange, but because he looked too normal. He wore simple clothes. Nothing expensive. Nothing that screamed confidence. His posture was calm, almost invisible, like someone who had learned a long time ago that staying quiet was safer than standing out. People passed him without a second glance. Some even brushed past his shoulder, not bothering to say sorry. To them, he was just another face in the crowd. Another ordinary guy. The kind of person you forget 5 seconds after you see him. But that was the illusion. Because sometimes, the most dangerous power doesn't announce itself. It hides. It waits. It blends in. He chose a seat near the back. Not because he was afraid, but because he didn't need attention. His eyes moved slowly, calmly, observing everything. Not with fear, with awareness. Every laugh in the room, every whisper, every shift in tone. He noticed it all, and still, no one noticed him. A group nearby was loud. Too loud. Joking. Pushing each other. Testing limits. The kind of people who fed on reactions. The kind who searched for someone smaller, quieter, someone they could feel bigger than. They didn't see a threat. They saw a target. Or at least they thought they did. What they couldn't see was the discipline behind his stillness. The years of control hidden behind relaxed shoulders. The calm that only comes from someone who has faced pressure before. Real pressure, and learned to master it. His breathing was steady. Slow. Measured. Not nervous. Prepared. Because when you've trained your mind to stay calm in chaos, silence becomes your greatest weapon. Not loud words. Not big gestures. Just presence. There was something different about him. Not obvious. Not flashy. But if you looked closely, really closely, you might notice it. The way he sat. The way he held his hands. The way his eyes never panicked. It was the calm of someone who knew exactly who he was, even if no one else did. And that's what made this moment dangerous for everyone else in the room. Because they thought he was invisible. They thought he was ordinary. They had no idea. This was only the beginning. That tea first. It started small. A laugh that lingered a little too long. A whisper that wasn't really a whisper. A glance that carried more judgment than curiosity. The kind of behavior most people try to ignore. He felt it. Of course he did. But he didn't react. Not because he didn't care, but because he understood something most people never learn. Not every challenge is loud. Not every test comes with warning signs. Sometimes, disrespect arrives disguised as jokes. One of them nudged another and tilted his head in the quiet man's direction. They didn't even try to hide it. Their laughter grew louder, sharper. It filled the space in a way that demanded attention. Still, the quiet man remained calm. He kept his eyes forward, his expression neutral. That calm made them bolder. Because to people who feed on reactions, silence feels like permission. Another comment. Louder this time. Something meant to embarrass. Something meant to pull eyes toward him. A few people nearby shifted uncomfortably. They could sense it. That strange tension in the air when something is about to cross a line. But no one said anything. Most people don't. They tell themselves it's not their business. They tell themselves it's just words. They tell themselves it's safer to stay out of it. And that's how small disrespect grows into something bigger. The group leaned in closer, not physically, but socially. Their presence felt heavier. Their energy louder. They want a reaction. Any reaction. Anger. Fear. Embarrassment. Anything that would make them feel powerful. Still nothing. No raised voice. No defensive posture. No nervous movement. Just calm. And that confused them. Because they were used to seeing people shrink. They were used to seeing eyes drop. Shoulders tense. Voices shake. But this man? He didn't change. His stillness wasn't weakness. It was control. That made them uncomfortable. So they pushed harder. The jokes became sharper. The tone more personal. The words more deliberate. Not because they wanted humor, but because they wanted dominance. There's a difference. One of them leaned back and laughed loudly, making sure everyone could hear. It was performative. A show. A signal to the rest of the room. Look at us. We're in charge here. A few people laughed along. Not because it was funny, but because laughing felt safer than standing up. That's how it usually goes. The room began to feel smaller. The air heavier. And still, the quiet man didn't rise to it. Not once. Inside, though, something was shifting. Not anger, not fear. Focus. He wasn't ignoring them. He was studying them. Their tone, their timing, their need for attention. He had seen this pattern before. Different faces, same behavior. People who mistake loudness for strength. People who confuse intimidation with control. They thought they were testing him. In reality, they were revealing themselves. Every word they spoke told him exactly who they were, exactly how far they would go, exactly how fragile their confidence really was. Because true confidence doesn't need an audience. But insecurity? Insecurity demands one. The tension reached a point where even the room itself felt like it was holding its breath. Some people looked away. Some pretended not to notice. Some watched quietly, waiting to see what would happen next. They expected the quiet man to finally break, to snap, to argue, to defend himself. But he didn't. Instead, he did something far more unsettling. He slowly lifted his eyes, not in anger, not in fear, but with calm awareness. And for just a split second, the energy shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. The kind of shift you feel before something important happens. The kind that makes people instinctively sit up a little straighter, even if they don't know why. They still had no idea who he really was. They still thought they were in control. They still believed this was their moment. They were wrong. Because this wasn't the moment he reacted. This was the moment he decided. The room held its breath, though no one admitted it. Even the loudest, most confident of the bullies felt something strange in the air. Something unexplainable. The quiet man sat still, like a rock in the middle of a raging river. Calm, unmoved, watching, waiting. He wasn't reacting because he didn't care. He was reacting because he knew when the time was right. And right now, it wasn't. Sometimes power isn't shown in the moment. It's felt. And the people around him could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. The whispers began almost instinctively. Who is this guy? Has he trained somewhere? Why doesn't he respond? Every word, every glance, every quiet observation he made added weight to the room. But no one yet understood the magnitude of what they were witnessing. He leaned back slightly, his eyes sweeping across the room. Not harshly, not judgmentally, but with a clarity that made it feel as though he could see through each person. Through their intentions, their insecurities, their false bravado. And as the tension built, so did the unease. The bullies exchanged glances. A nervous laugh here, a subtle pause there. They weren't used to being read so easily. People like them thrived on chaos, on unpredictability, but this man was different. Predictable only in his unpredictability. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't showmanship. It was discipline. Every muscle relaxed, every breath controlled, every eye contact calculated, not to intimidate but to observe. And in that observation, he learned names, strengths, weaknesses, habits, patterns. He absorbed it all, silently cataloging every detail. No one had ever seen someone so quiet and so aware. Some of the onlookers tried to dismiss it. He's just sitting there, one muttered under his breath, though his voice shook. Nothing to him, but the room knew. Even subconsciously, everyone knew something about him was different. Something dangerous. The energy he carried wasn't loud. It wasn't visible in gestures or in tone, but it pressed down on the space like gravity. Unseen, but impossible to ignore. And that's when the first thought hit them. Maybe this guy isn't just ordinary. Not just ordinary, but extraordinary. The quiet man shifted, ever so slightly, and for a brief instant, the light caught his face in a way that made it look sharper, more defined, almost famous. Something familiar about the structure of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. But they couldn't place it. Their minds tried to rationalize it. No, couldn't be. He's just quiet, normal. But something deeper whispered the truth. Something their gut knew, but their minds refused to accept. There's a difference between noticing and recognizing. And recognition was beginning to stir in the room. The whispers grew louder. Not just the bullies, but the bystanders. People who had been watching quietly, unnoticed, began to murmur among themselves. Is that? No, it can't be. But it looks just like him. And while they speculated, the quiet man remained seated. Calm, collected, unassuming. because he didn't need to confirm or deny anything. Not yet. Revealing himself too early would spoil the moment. And in moments like these, timing wasn't just important, it was everything. Every movement, every glance, every controlled breath was part of a larger plan. Not a plan to show off, not a plan to fight, not a plan to dominate. A plan to ensure that when the truth finally came out, it would land with unstoppable force. And that truth was simple, yet unbelievable. He was no ordinary man. He had lived, trained, and mastered what very few could even comprehend. He had skills honed to perfection, honed over years of discipline, sweat, and countless challenges. The energy in the room shifted subtly, but unmistakably. Something primal awakened in the crowd. Curiosity, fear, anticipation. The bullies who had started this chain of disrespect thinking they held control now felt the first stirrings of doubt. They still didn't know who he was, but their instinct screamed, he's not what he seems. And that's when the first signs of panic flickered in their eyes. Not because they understood his full power, not because they knew who he was, but because deep down, something told them that what they were about to face would change everything. The ordinary had hidden the extraordinary, and the world around him was about to find out. The room was silent now, but it wasn't the calm of peace. It was the quiet that comes just before the storm. Every whisper had stopped. Every laugh had vanished. Every confident smirk seemed to fade as if swallowed by an invisible weight. He leaned forward ever so slightly, just enough for a shadow to touch the edge of his cheek. The light caught the curve of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze. For the first time, anyone paying attention might notice something unmistakable, something legendary. The bullies shifted nervously. Some tried to laugh it off. It's nothing, one muttered, but the words were hollow, failing to fill the growing tension in the room. He opened his mouth, but it wasn't loud, not theatrical, not showy, just a single word, spoken with calm authority, but sharp enough to make every head turn. Bruce! At first, no one reacted. The word hung in the air like a spark over dry tinder. A pause, then a second word, slower this time, deliberate. Lee. The room froze. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Some of them thought they misheard. Did he just say, Bruce Lee? A voice whispered, trembling. No, can't be. Another replied, though their tone lacked conviction. Yes, it was him. The man they thought was ordinary, invisible, powerless, was Bruce Lee. The realization hit like a tidal wave. Shock, confusion, disbelief. Every emotion collided in the minds of the onlookers. The bullies who had laughed just moments ago now felt their confidence crumble. They had mocked a quiet man. They had assumed weakness. They had thought themselves untouchable. And now, everything they believed was shattered. Because this wasn't just a name. This was a legacy, a living legend. Every subtle motion, every calm glance, every measured breath they had dismissed before now carried weight beyond comprehension. They weren't just dealing with a man. They were in the presence of someone whose skill, discipline, and power were renowned across the world. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people whispered to each other in disbelief. Others froze entirely, unable to even process the truth. The quiet ones watching from the corners of the room felt it first. The shift in energy, the air thickening with anticipation, the tension of knowing that someone extraordinary was sitting among them. The bullies, the ones who thought they controlled the room, now glanced at each other with a growing sense of dread. Their bravado faltered. Their eyes darted around, searching for an escape they didn't know existed. Bruce Lee didn't flinch. He didn't need to. His calm, unwavering gaze said more than words ever could. He was ready. He had been ready all along. And now, they would finally understand that every movement they had made, every attempt to dominate or humiliate, had been noticed, cataloged, and assessed. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just him and them. The quiet man who was no longer quiet, the ordinary man who was extraordinary. They felt the weight of his presence, the power behind his eyes, the subtle, undeniable aura that separated him from everyone else. This wasn't about fear. Not yet. It was about recognition. Recognition that they had misjudged him, that they had underestimated the man sitting quietly before them. And that misjudgment could be the biggest mistake of their lives. Every whisper, every attempt at mockery, every smirk, every shove, it had all led to this moment. The moment where Bruce Lee revealed himself. The moment where the ordinary became legendary. The moment where nothing would ever feel the same again. They still didn't fully comprehend his power. They didn't need to. The name alone carried the weight. The legacy alone demanded respect. Because in that single revelation, in those two simple words, Bruce Lee, everything changed. The air shifted. The energy in the room transformed from casual chaos to tense awareness. The bullies could no longer act carelessly. Every action now had consequences they could barely imagine. And Bruce Lee? He didn't move. Not yet. Not until the time was right. Because legends don't need to prove themselves immediately. They let the world realize it slowly, painfully, unforgettably. And this was only the beginning. The room had changed. It wasn't bigger or smaller. It wasn't brighter or darker. But the energy inside it had shifted. Every person in the room felt it, though none of them could explain why. Bruce Lee didn't move. Not in any dramatic way. Not with a threatening gesture. He simply remained seated, calm, composed, and in total control of himself. And yet, his presence alone was enough. The bullies who had laughed, shoved, and mocked just moments ago now felt the first twinges of unease. Their confidence wavered, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but enough to unbalance their carefully constructed arrogance. Bruce Lee's eyes scanned the room, slowly, deliberately. Each glance wasn't random. Each flick of his gaze was like a spotlight on those who had tried to intimidate him. The bullies could feel it, not physically, not in any tangible way, but the awareness of being seen deeply, completely, without judgment rattled them. There was no fear in his gaze, no anger, just clarity, total awareness. And in that awareness was power. True power doesn't shout. True power doesn't need to strike. True power simply exists, and the world adjusts around it. The first bully noticed it, a twitch in his hand, a small hesitation in his step. He tried to laugh, to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, gnawing at him. He couldn't place why. It wasn't something he had seen, it was something he felt. The second bully looked at his friend, expecting reassurance. Instead, he saw the same unease mirrored in the eyes he had relied on for courage. Doubt spread. Like a ripple in water, uncertainty traveled from one person to the next. Bruce Lee didn't raise his voice. He didn't move aggressively. He didn't need to. His calm presence alone forced them to confront a reality they had never considered. That control and strength weren't always physical. Sometimes they were invisible, intangible, unseen. Even the bystanders, the quiet observers who had stayed at the edges, felt it. Some of them instinctively straightened in their seats. Some held their breath. Others could barely tear their eyes away, captivated by the impossible stillness, the disciplined aura, the way he seemed to occupy the room without touching it. It was unsettling, in the most compelling way possible. Bruce Lee's calm created a vacuum that the bullies couldn't fill with noise or bravado. Every smirk, every whispered joke, every mocking glance was met with the same unshakable serenity. They had thought chaos would unnerve him. They had assumed loudness and aggression would provoke fear. They had underestimated the difference between reaction and control. Control wasn't about fighting. Control wasn't about proving dominance with fists or shouts. Control was about presence, about timing, about letting the world reveal itself around you while you remained unshaken. A subtle shift happened. They began to mirror his calm, subconsciously. Breathing slowed, posture straightened, eyes flicked down, then back up, hesitant. They wanted to regain composure, but the moment had passed. Bruce Lee had already established the unspoken rules. Respect was demanded. It didn't need to be forced. Attention was claimed, not through shouting, but through mere existence. And in that moment, the bullies understood, without a single strike, without a single harsh word, without a single move, they were no longer in control. All of them. The quiet man they had dismissed as ordinary had changed the dynamics entirely. Not with violence, not with anger, but with sheer presence. And it was intoxicating. Some felt fear. Some felt awe. Some felt a strange mix of both, so powerful it rooted them to the spot. Bruce Lee remained still, watching, waiting, calmly letting the realization sink in. And in the silence, something unspoken passed between them. They understood. Their energy, their arrogance, their mockery. They had been seen. Every action, every intention cataloged. And every misstep was silently noted. The power didn't come from motion. It came from awareness. The control didn't come from strength. It came from mastery. And the lesson was clear. You can't underestimate someone. You can mock someone. You can assume dominance. But the moment you underestimate a master, even without a single blow, the world shifts under your feet. Because real power doesn't need to strike. It simply exists. And everyone in the room now knew it. The room was no longer the same. The bullies had come in full of energy, loud and reckless, thinking they controlled the space. They had expected submission, fear, perhaps even a fight. What they got instead was silence. A silence that spoke louder than any shout. Bruce Lee didn't need to move. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to throw a punch. All he needed was his presence, and that presence carried weight far heavier than their bravado. The first wave of emotional impact hit slowly. Doubt. The bullies glanced at one another, searching for reassurance. But there was none. The quiet observers who had once pretended not to notice them now stared openly, their eyes reflecting curiosity and subtle awe. The bullies realized their actions no longer intimidated anyone. They had only drawn attention to themselves, to their insecurities. A second wave followed. Embarrassment. They remembered their mocking jokes, their shoves, their sneers. What had once seemed harmless, even powerful, now looked foolish under the weight of calm scrutiny. They felt exposed, vulnerable, their attempts at dominance crumbling in real time. Bruce Lee's gaze didn't waver. He didn't smirk. He simply watched, steady, assessing, knowing. And every passing second amplified the realization for the bullies. They had misjudged him completely. A subtle shift in their body language betrayed them. Shoulders drooped. Eyes darted. Hands that had fidgeted with confidence now trembled slightly. It was as though the air around Bruce Lee carried invisible pressure. Not physical, but psychological. Then came awe. Some of the bullies' eyes widened. Not in fear, but in recognition of something far greater than themselves. They saw it now. The quiet mastery behind the calm. The decades of discipline hidden behind an ordinary exterior. The aura of someone who had lived, trained, and mastered more than they could ever imagine. And for a brief moment, the world felt unbalanced. Some tried to laugh it off, but the laughter sounded hollow even to themselves. The jokes that had once been weapons now rang empty. The confidence that had fueled them all day now evaporated under the weight of his presence. They didn't understand why they felt small, why the room seemed heavier, why their words no longer carried power. But they felt it, deeply, in their gut, in the back of their minds. And that's when the fear began to seep in. Not the fear of violence, but the fear of irrelevance, of being exposed, of realizing that their dominance was meaningless against someone whose control came from within. Some of the quiet observers shifted slightly closer, as if drawn by an invisible magnet. They felt compelled to witness what was happening, to absorb the lesson silently unfolding before them. The bullies, on the other hand, could only feel the shift. Their energy, once overflowing, now felt awkward, misaligned, fragile. Every action they considered seemed excessive, unnecessary, doomed to fail. And in that failure lay the weight of reality. They were no longer in charge. Bruce Lee's calm didn't just dominate the room, it reshaped it. The laughter, the whispers, the chaotic energy all recoiled, replaced by tension, awareness, and an unspoken acknowledgement of power. And in that acknowledgement, the bullies experienced something else: regret. They regretted underestimating him. They regretted mocking him. They regretted believing that appearances alone defined strength. But there was no point in regret yet, no escape. Not while Bruce Lee remained perfectly composed. Not while his mastery radiated, unseen yet undeniable, filling the space, challenging them mentally and emotionally at every turn. Even the air seemed to obey him, as if acknowledging that he was the center, the axis around which reality had subtly realigned. Every heartbeat in the room grew louder in the bullies' minds. Every breath felt heavier. Every glance toward him reminded them that the ordinary had been a mask. And behind that mask was a legend. They had mocked a quiet man. They had assumed dominance. And now, without a single strike, without a single raised voice, without a single show of aggression, they understood. Their world had shifted. Their arrogance had crumbled. Because true power doesn't need to fight. It simply reveals itself. And everyone in the room now felt the weight of that revelation. Physically, mentally, emotionally. Bruce Lee didn't need to act yet. The emotional payoff had already begun. The lesson was complete. The bullies had been humbled, not by violence, but by presence. Not by force, but by mastery. Not by action, but by awareness. And the room had witnessed it all. The room was still, but it was no longer quiet in the way it had been before. The energy had shifted, thickened, and every person present could feel it, even if they didn't fully understand why. Bruce Lee remained seated, calm, composed, unshaken. But this calm was no longer just observation. It had become a force of its own. The bullies who had thought themselves untouchable now looked like they were walking on thin ice. Every glance, every whisper, every movement was calculated instinctively, not by them, but by the presence they could not escape. They didn't yet see what was coming, and that was the trap. Bruce Lee's silence had done what words, threats, and violence could not. It had unbalanced them. His mastery had turned their confidence into doubt, their laughter into unease, their bravado into hesitation. And now, the moment they had all been unconsciously waiting for, the moment that would change everything, was approaching. But no one could predict exactly when it would happen. Not the bullies, not the bystanders, not even the quiet observers at the edges of the room. They could only feel the tension building, the anticipation tightening like a coil, ready to snap. And Bruce Lee? He simply waited. His eyes scanned the room slowly, deliberately, stopping briefly on each person who had tried to dominate him. Not with anger, not with malice, but with absolute clarity, an understanding of who they were, what they feared, and what they had underestimated. Every subtle movement of his body, every tiny shift in his posture, was a signal, though no one fully realized it. He was preparing them, mentally, emotionally, for the revelation that was about to unfold. They were trapped, not by chains, not by violence, not by force, but by something far more powerful, the knowledge that they were completely outmatched, even before anything had happened. And the beauty of it, the true genius of his control, was that it didn't feel like control. At least, not yet. It felt like anticipation, curiosity, unease, a strange mixture of fear and fascination. Every second that passed, the room became more aware. The bullies could feel it creeping into their thoughts. We misjudged him. We underestimated him. We have no idea what he can do. And yet they couldn't look away. The quiet observers felt it too. They leaned in instinctively, drawn to the tension. They wanted to see what would happen next, who would break first, who would react, and how the legend that had just revealed himself as Bruce Lee would finally move. Time seemed to stretch. Each heartbeat became a drumbeat in the silence, echoing in the minds of everyone present. And then, just as the tension became almost unbearable, Bruce Lee moved. Not in a way that revealed the full extent of his power. Not in a way that ended the confrontation. Not yet. But in a single, almost imperceptible gesture, he let the world know the ordinary was gone. The legend was here. It was enough. Enough to make every bully second-guess themselves. Enough to make every observer lean closer, craving the unfolding story. Enough to make everyone in the room understand one undeniable truth. What happened next would change everything. The question now wasn't if something would happen. It was what would happen. And that question, the unknown, the suspense, the anticipation, was more powerful than any punch, any strike, any act of aggression ever could be. Because the human mind craves resolution, craves action, craves the payoff. And Bruce Lee had just set the stage for it. The quiet man, the legend hidden in plain sight, had trapped the minds and hearts of everyone around him. They could feel it. They couldn't escape it. And now, they would have to wait. Wait for the moment when ordinary would shatter. Wait for the moment when calm would explode into mastery. Wait for the moment that no one would forget. And the viewers, watching this story unfold, would feel the tension just the same. Because the answer was coming. And it was going to be unforgettable.